Hi, I'm Gus Chikala, project management expert. Today's topic is project leadership. Leadership is taken, not given. So let's talk about this idea. Why do we talk about project leadership in the context of it's taken, not given? And the first thing that comes to my mind is that leadership, or leaders themselves, is a little bit like respect. If I told you that respect is taken, not given, you would probably disagree with that. Because that's, the verb that people would say about respect is that it's earned, okay? And so what we're going to talk about today is why is leadership taken first, not given, and then earned, okay, in some situations, especially in the project-based world. So for today, we're going to think about leadership in the context of my project management definition. My definition of project management is the constant process of resyncing the plan to the new realities in the face of resistance. So we know the project management is an ongoing process. Obviously, the plan doesn't even exist until some things happen in the project management world, but we're really talking about in the execution of a project, we are supposed to understand what reality is and against the actuals and the variances against the plan to understand where this project is heading. What are the trends? What's the earned value, for example? Okay, so the other thing I would say is if we take just the word project away and we say what are some adjectives that define the word leadership. And in our full-day workshop, we spend about 10 slides on this from different books, from different white papers, from people from the audience, and we come up with something like 55 different definitions or attributes of a strong leader or an effective leader. Okay? And what we want to talk about today is we're talking about a specific kind of leader, a leader that lives in the project-based world who's usually called a project manager. But project managers oftentimes are not only the managers, they are the leaders, and there's a difference, and that's what I want to talk about, okay? So I put down here PMP skills and leadership skills. So the first half of this definition that goes right about here, constant process of resyncing the plan to the new reality. What are we doing? We're collecting actual progress against the plan. We're finding out, we would usually say something like, we'll build the plan, we'll baseline the plan, we'll get actuals, we'll see what the variances are against the plan, and what we're finding out when there's variances, there are new realities in the world, okay? So what is that? That's the science of project management, right? That is the functional skills, what I call the price of admission. If you're a project manager, you need to have the capability to understand what the project management body of knowledge encompasses. And I'm not saying it has to be the body of knowledge. It could be Prince, it could be your favorite project management book. What I'm talking about is the functional skills and processes of project management, of the function of project management. Something I can test for, okay? So the PMP, you can sit down and take a test and prove that you understand the functional processes of project management, right? We can't resync the plan to reality if we don't know how to take a baseline, if we don't know how to collect actuals around scope, around labor, around cost, around schedules and milestones, okay? So that's project management. Now what about this, what do we mean by the face of resistance? Well, as a project leader, if I say, hey, guess what? We resync the plan to reality, we change the plan to a new reality, we will oftentimes get resistance. And here's the question. How does a project manager convince a sponsor to reach back into the budget or to go to his or her constituents in the business world to say, we need more time, we're not going to be able to deliver to the deadline that we committed to, we're not going to have we're going to have to increase the budget. We're going to have to spend more money than we expected. And there's a lot of conversations that can happen here. For example, if I said project leaders are supposed to deliver success, What is success? Why are we rethinking? What are we watching? Right? Usually we'll say a project is successful on time, on budget, and I'll say on spec. What do I mean by the spec? The spec is the specification, the design of a solution that solves a business problem, right? It's the scope. So here's a question. If that's the definition of success, let me ask you a question. What if I had a baseline of 6 months on a project, and I'm going to now telling you the new reality is it's going to be 8 months? Is that a failure? If that's success, what's failure? How about if I tell you my budget's $1 million, but it's going to take 1.3 to finish this project in 8 months? Is that a failure? Some will say no. So when I ask this question, I get a little bit, well, it depends. And it really does if you think about it, right? At the end of the day, if we solve the problem by spending more time and more budget, is that okay? Right? So that's what, when we're thinking about the resistance is, hey, wait a minute. If we've got a new reality, of course there's going to be some resistance. It's bad news. Right? So project managers who have leadership capabilities have to have a skill. One of the skills is handling bad news, managing expectations, seeking pain early. What do we mean by that? If something is looking bad, if we're having a trend that we may not be able to deliver as expected, we've got to deal with that, right? So when I think about the functional process that we can test for the PMP skills, there's another whole set of skills that says, what do we have to be good at to win the conversation, to say we've got to do something when our triple constraint model of time or schedule and resource, which is the dollars and the resource and the people and the scope, if something happens here, like an increase in scope, how are we going to deal with that? How do we sell the idea that this is a new reality? Because here's the resistance. Hey, Gus, you're the project manager. Guess what? I got a new idea. I'm the project sponsor. I don't like the idea that you're rethinking the plan to reality. How about we do this? How about we hold the plan and you do something about fixing that reality out there, right? And they don't say it in those words, but that's the message, right? What's the reality that you can bring to us to make this happen? So we talk about that in another video on the topic of change. So if you want more on that, go over there. I'm going to stay on this topic of the leadership skills. The leadership skills, what are they? And here's how we think about it. When we do our leadership workshop, we talk about some of the process groups that are in the project management body of knowledge, or the PMI process groups. The major groups of things that happen in a project in terms of how we define a project, how we plan it, how we execute it, and we close it out. And here's some examples of what do we mean by resistance and what kind of skills do we have to deal with the resistance. Because here's the harsh reality. If we can't ply our trade, if we can't do what it takes to deal with this imbalance that happens when reality changes against the plan, we have to use some project management skills to talk about how we change the plan, okay? But if we're doing that and we're getting resistance, here's what happens with a lot of project managers. They're not very good against resistance. They're not very good at pushing back people 2-3 levels in the organization that are sponsors, that are vice presidents and executives, to say, you need to change your mind. I'm going to try to persuade you to change your mind. Some project managers don't have enough courage. Some project managers understand that sometimes they shoot the messenger. Okay? So you deliver bad news, and they say, well, we don't like your news, so we'll put another project manager in there that gives us better news. Right? So what happens now is, if we don't get the chance to use the theory to fix this plan, to reflect it in reality, that's the first symptom of failure. When we're not following the plan and we're pretending that we can change reality, that is a big symptom of failure. So when we talk about facing resistance, we talk about defining moments. What are those defining moments that we could identify what I call predictable points of resistance? We can predict in these different phases in the project management process of the kind of resistance we'll get, the specific things that happen here that are not popular. Let me give you an example. When does a project get defined? When we talk about the portfolio and project management process, a lot of organizations have their portfolio process up here, defining a slate of projects, oftentimes called annual budgeting. What are the new products, the new systems, the whatever things we're going to do in our business to reach our vision, to fulfill our mission, to define our strategy, to execute those projects, and to do that, to build that portfolio, we need to know how much, well, let me ask, not even just the dollars, the question I would ask is, what's the right project? If you were doing a new addition on your house, and you had a stack of proposals from contractors, what would be the right proposal? And if we go through that and say, what's the right project, we would say the best price, the optimal risk, the best schedule, the best return on investment. Am I going to put a man cave in the basement or a kitchen? Probably the kitchen has a better ROI when you sell that house. So there's a whole lot of attributes to a project that gets selected to a portfolio. So we take some guesses when we put that in the portfolio this time of the year, late summer, early fall. We make those commitments in September, and March rolls around. So we defined something up front that was probably not a complete solution definition that we would expect in a charter that has a good set of business requirements, clear, good measurable problem statements, good detailed information about how that project is going to be done, the how, the why, the how much, the how long, the what did we assume, to what were the risks. So a lot of times when we get into the real definition, when we kick off the project, we're already out of sync with reality. We threw something in here September, we said 6 months, we said $1 million, and now we put a project manager that does some deep definition of a charter, and we're already out of sync. Is that predictable? Have you been in an organization where you get handed a project and it's already out of sync with reality? And guess what? You're expected to get started and go in most cases, some organizations are different, but in most cases what we've seen is there's already a predictable point of resistance that we're going to be asked to change reality and keep the plan consistent, and that doesn't work. So how do we use our leadership skills to do that? Right? How do we sell the concept? I call it, if you see the slides that we do for leadership, this slide would have the emperor's new clothes. The king's walking down Main Street in his underwear, and everybody says he has fine clothes. We are trained in some organizations to go with the flow, to be a good sport, to support what we said 6 months ago, even though we think it's not reality. Okay? So we have to figure out this idea, this question of, does bad news get better over time? And the answer is, it's not like cheese, it's not like wine. No, it doesn't get better with time. Right? So how do we face this reality in the face of resistance? How about another example? How about we go into we put this plan together and we go to a kickoff. We're going to share our project plan. What do people want to hear in a kickoff? They want to hear that you're going to deliver success. Right? So if I'm a project manager, I'm putting forth the business case that says, here's the time we need, here's the budget we need, here's the approach we're going to take, here's how we're going to solve this problem, here's our methodology to get this done. We have a plan, okay? And what I would suggest we say is, oh, by the way, as a leader, I am obliged to tell you there's some bad news that could happen in this project. We could have a scope change that forces a resyncing the plan to reality. We call that scope management. We call it change control. Okay? I bring that up in a kickoff, I get some pushback right away. Whoa, wait a minute. Why are you going to change the plan, Gus? I'm not going to change the plan. I'm going to hear about things out there where we need to have some increases of features in your products. And when we do that, we're going to need some more time and some budget. And we have a plan to do that. It's called change control. And we talk about the change control process. We talk about doing, what do people want to know? Hey, we got a new scope. What are they asking you? They're doing the impact analysis. Oh, impact analysis. So you're asking me to say if you increase scope, what is the price and the time? Well, guess what? Who does the impact? I'm in the middle of the project, a new feature comes out on this product, and you come to me and say we need something new. The people who are building the solution are the same people that can render, usually have the closest expertise to render a more accurate verdict of the impact. So even doing impact analysis is disruptive. Okay? So again, will we get resistance on that? Yes, we will. Can we predict that? Yes, we can. So we should know that we have a responsibility about talking about scope change in the beginning to set the idea, to really make our sponsors understand that this is not a process where we resync reality to the plan. This is a world where the plan is, most cases, there might be exceptions, but in most cases the plan will be resynced with reality, which means the plan is going to change. Okay, how about execution? One of the things we see in execution is the essence of execution from a project management skill or function is we would call that monitoring and controlling, right? The idea of controlling execution of a project. And here's what I see from a resistance standpoint. The problem we have here is that this takes a lot of discipline. It takes time. It takes cadence. It takes skills that a lot of project managers, frankly, would rather not to do, right? If I'm a leader who's great at negotiating and working in the gray area and doing compromises and trade-offs when we have this out of sync condition, I'm typically not wanting to do the deep administrivia that defines the control cycle. The idea of collecting actuals, the ideas of putting out action item lists after meetings, having status meetings, having minutes, having updated project plans. So the definition of control is the regular cycle of doing the control activities, of updating the actuals, the risks, the issues, the scope management, all those things that really define what we mean by control. And what I've learned as a project leader is if I do these things well, I actually do have control of the project. If we schedule the meetings, update the meetings, do the communications, and really define the boundaries of what we're doing, we in fact are making a cadence that brings a project team under control to really understand the scope, to understand why we're going to have to make changes and how we're going to deal with it. The problem I see is a lot of project managers are running 2, 3, 4, 5 different projects. And if you really do the math of the time required, of the skills required of a project manager. Now, some organizations provide project coordinators to sort of do the project accounting, if you will, or the scorekeeping, and send that up to a project leader, or a project manager or a project coordinator sends it to a project program manager. Okay, but the real question is, some of the resistance I think we have to understand, one of our defining moments as a project manager is to be realistic if we have enough time to actually do execution, to bring things under control so that we actually can have this conversation in a real world that we really, we cannot really know that the plan has to be resynced to reality unless we're doing control effectively on a regular basis, and that's a challenge for a lot of organizations. Not enough project managers to do it right. And then we go to another example of a predictable point of resistance is closeout. Is, the question I would ask is, when do we start defining the end of the project, right? And the answer is at the beginning at definition, right? Expected exit criteria for each phase, for each deliverable, and sometimes the subject of sign-off comes up. I like to use a process that says all deliverables are acceptable unless our sponsor sends something in writing that says we don't like the deliverable, or there's something off spec, or something that we missed. So what that does, it changes the laws of motion, Newton's laws of motions. It says a body at rest stays at rest unless what? Acted on by an outside force, okay? So if I'm asking for a sign off and I drop that pen on the desk, I've got to motivate somebody to pick that thing up and sign it. If I say instead, here's the pen, you own the pen, and if you don't pick the pen up, your deliverable is delivered. It's a sign, it's assumed acceptance, can be dangerous. So what would I do? I give you 3 to 5 days. We give you a closeout process. We say an acceptance process. We give you the deliverable. After 3 days, we say, hey, we had a 5-day cycle. I haven't heard from you yet. Is everything okay? We don't do that by email. We show up in their office, hopefully. And at the 5th day, we say, thank you for accepting our deliverable. We didn't hear any feedback, so we're moving to the next phase, right? So, but the point is, just some examples of how do we really define an orderly process, what I call a first downs strategy, right? We're not going to do a throw a Hail Mary at the end of the football game. We're going to use incremental closes, so when we get to the last piece of the project, there's no surprises when we're done. The other thing I like to do during control is that we have a control document, we have a scope document, a charter. I like to convert the last things in the project into a punch list. We can learn that from an industry that's been around for a long time. I guess for the first time we stretched a mammoth skin over a mammoth tusk to make to build something, construction. That is called the punch list, right? So another thing I would definitely recognize as a good tool is an action items list that gets smaller and smaller and smaller. When the action list is over, we have closeout and get concurrence on that, and that's one of the examples of control. So what's the point? The point is, when we think about project leadership, we think about the use of our skills to use the functions of project management to deliver on time, on budget, on spec, but also understand that we're going to get resistance sometimes. And in my world, in my experience, if we don't overcome the resistance, that is the first time we're starting to see failure. And if we get good at sensing this, that we have a problem, and we're going to be professional about it, but we're going to be very forthright that this is not going to work, and don't use those words, it's called risk, right? It's a high probability that we'll miss the schedule. It's a high probability that we can't hit the budget. You want me to be a good sport? You want me to pretend like reality hasn't changed? I will do that, but I will put that in my risk register and say, we have resistance, and that's a risk, because it's a risk that if we don't follow the good recommendations we come from the project functions, we are putting ourselves into jeopardy, and sometimes that's the best we can do. Have a risk management register and use your leadership skills to make sure everybody understands that we've documented that we've had an out of sync condition, and we are giving in to the sponsors who are resisting these changes, and therefore that could, in fact, that resistance becomes a point of risk. So that's the topic for today. I hope you got a lot out of it. I put a lot of stuff on the board here. We have a number of slides that break these down in separate topics. We have these different process groups and some of the predictable points of resistance. If we did an interaction workshop and said, let's bring up some other examples of predictable resistance, you could probably go to every major function in the project management skills and come up with a predictable resistance when somebody doesn't want to find that, follow the plan essentially. So anyway, there's a link below. We'll give you a link to go and get some more documentation instead of this very crowded whiteboard. I thank you for your time today, and I'm Gus Chikala, project management expert.